Sorry, guys. Anyone knows where Vladimir is? Can you maybe? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear colleagues, dear friends. Welcome to this webinar organized by the IOC of UNESCO in the context of the IOC Assembly, which will kick off next week. Today, our theme is to discuss a very important initiative that I'm sure all of you are aware of. This is the Ocean Decade. We're talking about building a global action framework for transformative ocean science science-based solutions, sorry. My name is Julien Barbier. I'm the head of Marine Policy and Regional Coordination Section here at the IOC and also the focal point for the decade. It's my honor to serve you today as a moderator. This is a very important time for the decade, particularly in the last couple of weeks. You may be aware that on the 1st of June, we had our global launching event for the decade, which was hosted by the government of Germany, and which is now going to be followed by a series of virtual Ocean Decade laboratories that are going to take place between July and May of next year, and really aim at catalyzing partnerships in support of the decade. Our goal today is really to provide you with more information. Of course, there is going to be a discussion during the IOC Assembly on the decade, and there will be ample time for national delegations to provide feedbacks and guidance. But here today, we really want to have an exchange with you, with the IOC member states, but I would say even broader, with the ocean community at large, about the decade and what are the new elements and the developments that are taking place. So today, we are going to talk also about the first set of endorsed programs, which we announced yesterday on World Ocean Day. So this is a landmark moment for the decade after 3 years of preparation and work with so many stakeholders that we are really going to now have a very concrete programs that are going to help deliver against the objectives of a decade, but also not only programs, but also contributions that many are putting on the table to support this work. We are also going to address the issue of engagement at the national and regional level, particularly looking at what kind of mechanisms are emerging, particularly through the context of national decade committees, but also regional collaborations in the support. And we'll have a few stakeholders telling us where they are with these processes and how they are using the decade and to really create this movement of stakeholders and innovation. Before we get started, I just want to highlight a few technical issues. First of all, that all the participants are muted, but we want still to have an interaction with you. So you are very much encouraged to ask questions or post comments using the Q&A box. So this is the little button at the bottom of your screen. So please do so. I just want to highlight that, of course, we also have a interpretation in all 4 languages, which is provided. And again, there's a button at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation. If you click on that, you can select one of those languages. The session will be recorded and the videos will be available on the Ocean Decade org website as well as on the IOC website. And finally, the summaries and the PowerPoint presentations that you are going to see today are also going to be posted on our website. So you've seen the slide with the programs. I think without further ado, we have a really packed agenda for us today, but we still want some interaction. So let's start by inviting our Executive Secretary, Dr. Vladimir Ryabinin, to give his opening remarks so that we can kick off our webinar. Vladimir, over to you.
Thank you very much, Julian. Good time of the day or night, ladies and gentlemen. And I would like to once again congratulate you on the World Oceans Day, which was the first World Oceans Day during the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And, you know, we really celebrated this day worldwide because we announced to the world 28 programs of the decade, 6 programs and actions that were registered that are conducted by the United Nations agencies, and more than 30 different contributions. Ladies and gentlemen, I think with the help of IOC and the initiative of IOC, we are now turning changing the world, because I think the engagement, the enthusiasm, inspiration among all of us is high, and the whole community is moving forward on dozens of projects and programs, and more will come. So I would like to welcome all the participants, all the speakers. I would like to say that science is now the driving force for better life, for sustainable development, which means that we not only need to improve the quality of our life, but also leave the future generations the capability to live also in decent conditions without undermining the future that we are borrowing from them. So I think we are on the right track. It is very important now that everyone is engaged, and I would like also to say that the co-design, co-creation, involvement, discussions continue, and this is just a contribution that will enable IOC member states to fulfill that important assignment. IOC is the coordinator of the decade, but this is not an IOC decade, this decade for all the world, for all the partners. So we would like really to have partners on equal footing with all of us, creating decade, engaging and changing the world. Thank you so much. So back to you, Julian.
Great, thank you very much, Vladimir. I think we're going to go straight into our first topic, and I'm sure most of you want to hear about those decade actions that Vladimir just highlighted that were announced yesterday. So to really take us very briefly through this very diverse set of initiatives, we're going to ask my colleague Alison Clausen, who of course is also a leading force within the decade team, to present you some of those actions. So Alison, please over to you.
Thanks, Julian, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. As Julian said, I am going to go quite briefly through the results of the endorsement process, but I know my colleagues are going to put some links in the chat box while I'm talking, where you'll be able to find more details. So hopefully this can give you at least a taste of where we're at currently with the endorsed actions, and then you can follow the links to find out more information. So just a quick reminder of the process. The very first call for decade actions opened in October last year and closed in January this year. We had a fantastic response with more than 200 program submissions and around 30 contribution submissions. We went through a very detailed technical review and analysis of all these, and then presented the results of that to 2 meetings of the Interim Decade Advisory Board in April and May this year, which came up with a set of recommendations, comments, suggestions, which were taken on board, discussed with proponents, and eventually led to the decision by the Executive Secretary of the IOC to make decisions on the endorsement of a first set of programs and contributions. And that's really what I want to run you through today. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I'll start with the programs. If you remember correctly, the programs are the big global or major regional undertakings which contribute to the different Ocean Decade challenges. This first slide really aims to show what great diversity we got in terms of the endorsed programs. So the graph in the middle there shows the lead partner institution type, and I think everybody in the Decade team was really thrilled to see the diversity of partners that are part of this first set of endorsed programs. So obviously research institutes and universities, but NGOs, UN entities, some private sector as well. So that's been a really positive thing to see. Also good geographical diversity with lead partners from 53 different countries. It's still an area we need to work on, but I think for this first call for decade actions, we were happy to see so many different countries represented. If we can go to the next slide, please. So looking at the thematic areas covered by the endorsed programs, if you remember, we have the 10 Ocean Decade challenges, and this graph shows the distribution of the endorsed programs across those challenges. All of the programs, by their very nature, address multiple challenges, so it's not a simple calculation to do, but it does give you a vision, I guess, of the distribution. You can see that many of the endorsed programs address the observations infrastructure, sustainable ocean economy, the ocean climate nexus. They were really the challenges that were most commonly addressed. There were some gaps as well in the range of endorsed programs, particularly around pollution. There were fewer around some of the issues associated with multi-hazard early warning systems and around data. Capacity development was common throughout all the programs, which again is very positive to see given its important cross-cutting role in the decade. So the next slide, please. And this is where we get to the list of programs. So there were 28 endorsed programs. I have two slides, which hopefully you could read. But as I said, there is a link in the chat box where you can find out more information as well as contact details for all of these programs. 28 programs, broadly grouped just to try and show you the sort of the way that these came together, some of the themes. We had a number that were around observations, predictions, modeling, mapping of the seabed. One major program around data and the creation of a digital ecosystem through the Ocean Decade. So that's a very important group, obviously building on the work of Goose and others. And one of my colleagues will talk about one of those programs in a bit more detail later on. A range around multiple ocean stresses related to coral reef resilience, global oxygen or deoxygenation efforts, ocean acidification, as well as a major program on underwater anthropogenic noise. There was a group on deep sea research and management, as well as a program which is focusing more on the mesopelagic. And that's quite a diverse group, which is looking right from ecosystems to the infrastructure, to some of the observations, to the management and sustainable development questions. We can go to the next slide. A group around coastal resilience, two really interesting programs, one around deltas and another around estuaries, and then a really quite diverse program, which is looking at the resilience of ocean cities, which is led by one of our partners in Spain. Certainly a program around climate resilient fisheries. a number of programs around cultural values and ocean literacy, including one focusing more on underwater cultural heritage as well as different ocean literacy activities, a regional program from the Pacific, and then what we're calling a set of enabling or network programs, which are really programs that are transversal or cross-cutting across all the different themes that really aim to help different partners throughout the decade meet these aims of building transformative co-designed science. And they're quite an interesting and unique group that will work across all the different programs. If we can move to the next slide, please. In addition to the 28 endorsed programs, there are also a number of UN-led decade actions, including several around observations. And again, my colleague Emma will talk about these a little bit later on. A program related to ocean best practices, which relates to developing standardized methodologies and approaches to different parts of ocean science, as well as several fisheries-related programs from our friends and colleagues at the FAO. We can move to the next slide. The next category of endorsed actions was related to the contributions. So these are the in-kind or financial resources that are provided either for decade actions or for decade coordination costs. There are 33 contributions that have been endorsed in this first round. They're very diverse types, and I will try and run you through some of them briefly. I would also like to point out that there are several other types of contributions, including some of the collaborative centers, grant-making facilities, and so on, that are still being analysed because they're going to require some further detailed analysis and development of partnerships. But in this first set, we have these 33 contributions, including 17 from the US government, and on this figure you can see the diversity of other partners that submitted contributions that have been endorsed. And if we can move to the next slide, please. This graph then shows the thematic distribution of the contributions, similarly as we did for the program. So you can see that the contributions also address multiple challenges. This time round, capacity development is still there, still very prominent. Climate is still very prominent, but we've also got more around pollution, around ecosystems, and fewer around observations and coastal resilience. So we need to dig into this data a bit more and start seeing where some of the gaps are, where we can make some connections between the contributions and the programs, but it already gives us a first overview of the thematic trends that we're seeing. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. So this slide and the next one, sorry, the writing is a little bit small on this one, but this is a preview of the endorsed contributions. This first slide highlights the national contributions that came from member states. So we had contributions certainly from Italy, from Turkey, from Norway, from France, and as I said, quite a large number from different US government agencies and institutions who really submitted some significant decade contributions that have been endorsed in this first round. And then in the next slide, we have other contributions which are more linked to the different programs and themes from philanthropic foundations, as well as from private sector and from some universities and some ocean exploration institutes, as well as two really interesting in-kind contributions, one about an image data bank and another one from a fashion label in Australia, which is looking at helping with communications and spreading the word about the decade. If I move on to the next slide, just to give you some key dates and next steps, as Julian and Vladimir mentioned, the last couple of days have been a real milestone in the decade. Proponents were only informed of decisions on Monday this week, and then of course we had some public announcements yesterday to celebrate World Oceans Day, and we hope that you saw some of that on social media or on the website. Again, you'll be able to follow the links. Our next priority is really to turn our attention to the remaining submissions that came through the first call for decade action. So there are, as I mentioned, some contribution submissions that we have yet to analyze. And there were also a number of submissions that were submitted at the program level, but which are more accurately categorized as other types of decade actions, such as projects or activities. And then, of course, we need to start thinking about the next call for decade actions. This was really just the first call. There will be a second call this year, and we need to start scoping that and working out how we're going to target that and some dates. So stay tuned. We'll have some more information on that in a few weeks' time. And with that, I will conclude my presentation, but we did want to give you a taste or hear directly from the proponents of the Decade Actions. And so we're going to go straight into two videos. The first is from the leaders of the informal working group of the early career ocean professionals, who have prepared a video about their program on early career ocean professionals. And the second one, which we'll go to straight afterwards, is from the president of the World Maritime University, Dr. Cleopatra Doumbia Henry, who has pre-recorded a video to explain the program which has been endorsed on empowering women for the ocean decade. And both of these videos, we hope, give you a real sense of some of the inclusivity and broad diversity of the programs that have been endorsed in this first round. Thank you very much.
The ECOP program will serve as the backbone organization for enabling global ECOP engagement with all activities of the UN Ocean Decade. Our objective is for ECOPs to become an essential part of all programs, actions and activities, and to recognize their contributions throughout the decade. Our activities will serve to curate the global story of how ECOPs are leading the way.
Our expected outputs include the creation of a network of networks to build the global community of ECOPs. We will also expand opportunities for training and mentoring with special emphasis on building skills to bridge science to action. We will continue our activities related to ocean literacy and youth engagement to inspire the next generation to learn and care about the ocean. Finally, we will look for opportunities to stimulate engagement with the private sector to accelerate the use of science and technology to solve real-world problems.
And remember, the ECOP program is all about intergenerational diversity and how the next generation of ocean leaders can pave the way for a more inclusive and equitable use of science to drive sustainable development. We want to place special emphasis on giving opportunities to ECOPs from countries that have traditionally not had access to them.
Our program is quite ambitious, since our ultimate aim is to reach out to an entire generation, regardless of the ocean basin they live in or the ocean sector they're part of. But an aim that we must commit to, because by now we all know that generating the science we need for the ocean we want simply can't happen if we keep working in geographic and disciplinary or even generational silos. We look forward to working with all of you to ensure that the outcomes of the Ocean Decade last far beyond 2030. Thank you.
As president of the World Maritime University, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Research and Capacity Building Program on empowering women for the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. The program is generously sponsored by Fisheries and Oceans Canada and the Nippon Foundation. This vital program directly addresses gender equality issues in the context of both the generation and the use of ocean science knowledge. The goal is to advance an inclusive model to ensure gender equality and the empowerment of women of different backgrounds at all levels in ocean science, including raising the number of women at higher echelons and in decision-making roles. The research outcomes will be delivered through scholarly publications and the development of a strategy and action plan for women's empowerment in the Ocean Decade. The program actively promotes a co-design process with key partners in the Ocean Decade, including the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, the International Seabed Authority, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN Division for Ocean Affairs and the Law of the Sea, the UN Group of Experts on the Scientific Aspects of Marine Environmental Protection, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and the High Seas Alliance. The program will continue to work with other organizations and programs to advance women's empowerment, particularly through activities initiated by the IOC. For example, the director of the WMU Sasakawa Global Ocean Institute, Professor Ronan Long, contributed to the webinar on empowering women in the Ocean Decade organized by IOC and Fisheries and Oceans Canada last November. With the official endorsement by the partners of the Ocean Decade, the program is committed to collaborate with the international community to advance transformative actions to empower women for the Ocean Decade so that no one is left behind.
Great, thank you very much, and again, congratulations to all the proponents that got endorsed through this first call for action. You can find again all this information about those great programs on the IOC and the Decade website, and of course, stay tuned for further announcement after the summer. We still have also projects which are going to be announced as a result still of that first call for action, and we have, as Alison mentioned, going to also issue a second call for action in the second part of the year. And also, please, I see we have questions coming in. Please type them in the Q&A functions, and we'll look at those at the end. Now, the next segment of our webinar is really to see how we've talked about the role of IOC and how we are going with the coordination of a decade, but it's really to look at how IOC can also contribute from a programmatic perspective to the objectives of a decade. And we have programs in ocean observations, in data, in ocean science, in early warning services, in ocean management. All of these also have potentially the great contribution to deliver to the decade. And we have our new medium-term strategy, which will kick off from 2022, and where IOC will contribute to the decade by enhancing coherence, the impact, and future orientation of its programs. And finally, I think IOC member states are also very much well placed to lead and stimulate the formulation of decade actions through the engagement of stakeholders going beyond the traditional scientific and technical remit. So to start this discussion, we are going to invite our colleague Emma Eslop, who is a program specialist with the Global Ocean Observing System, GOOS, project office at IOC. And Emma is going to talk about a couple of initiatives that have been also endorsed as part of this announcement put forward by the GOOS community in response to the Ocean Decade Challenge number 7, a sustainable ocean observing system that delivers timely data and information accessible to all users. So Emma, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Julian. And yes, so I'm going to spend a few moments talking about ocean observing co-design, one of the 3 programs that GOOS has developed towards the Ocean Decade. So GOOS has spent quite a bit of time both dialoguing with partners and also within the community to develop 3 programs, which I'm delighted to also have been now endorsed. And GOOS really wanted to look at how to deliver some transformation elements, both for the global ocean observing system and for the decade, thinking that the ocean observations are really going to be a fundamental underpinning of the work of the decade. And so GOOS is operating really kind of at the heart of the Ocean Decade. So the 3 programs, Ocean Observing Co-Design, which we'll hear a little bit more about today, is around transforming the assessment and co-design of the ocean observing system. There is also Coast Predict, which is developed very much in partnership with the modelling community that looks at transforming the observing and also the modelling of the coastal area and connecting that from the open ocean to the coast to ensure that we can deliver improve services for the future. And Observing Together is the third program, and this is much more about a community scale project, so that you're really looking at enabling with the partnership with GUS, that these communities that invest in ocean observations also directly benefit from them, and all observations then can also be part of the global ocean observing system, so that no observations are left behind. Next slide, please. So now we're going to look at a little more detail at ocean observing co-design and what it means. So as I said, it's really about transforming our ocean observing system assessment and design process. So we're going to develop a user-focused and driven co-design process to really make the observing system more agile and user-driven. We're going to work with both existing and new observing networks through the decade, and integrate closely with the modeling community across assessment, assimilation, and prediction. This will enable regular reporting towards identified use area targets, and together, building with the modeling community and our stakeholders, building the process and infrastructure and tools for co-design. Next slide, please. You can see these intents sort of written into our objectives, and really integrating, observing and modeling to support a sustainable ocean society in ways that are measurably better is really at the core of ocean observing co-design. And it really should be a partnership between the observing and the modeling community. To making the ocean observing and information appreciably more impactful, we need partnership in the co-design process with both the modeling community, but also key user stakeholders. The aim, as I said, is to establish an international capacity, the infrastructure and the tools and the process, and make this modular, so that co-design can happen both at a global level, but also could be applied at, say, a regional or a local level, and also to entrain new observing and information technology across all elements of the programme. There is a course concept in the user area exemplars that we will use to help start and push the programme forward. And this is taking use areas and in training the key stakeholders, the key service deliverers in these use areas, and working with modelling to design these projects and programmes that will establish the connections and infrastructure needed. And these could, for example, be around extreme event forecasting, carbon budgets, reinsurance, or perhaps biodiversity. So this is really kind of one of the areas that we'll really start on. Next slide, please. The benefits for society should be in terms of an ability to better track the current state and future variability of the ocean, to predict and warn more skillfully, to manage ocean resources, empower society to adapt to change, and to assess the impact of our action towards a sustainable ocean. Next slide, please. Now, GUS isn't going to be doing this on its own. The programs will interact in a I guess, a community of practice, and certainly ocean observing co-design requires some very strong partnership, especially with the modeling community. And so 4C from Ocean Predict, another decade endorsed program, will be a very strong partner in this space. But we also look to the future with partnerships with programs like Ditto, the digital twin of the oceans, looking at future observing usage. And so the other areas are also within the global ocean observing networks and new initiatives in Marine Life 2020, Argo 2030, GoShip, GUS, Oasis DUS, all of these groups we would expect to really be interacting and be a part of ocean observing co-design. Last slide, please. Last slide, please. Thank you. So this is a thank you, as I say, thank you. And just a quick call to say, please get in touch if you are interested in understanding more, and also to find out or perhaps interact on the exemplars as we move forward, or to think about what sort of role that nations could play in developing some of this infrastructure in terms of centres of excellence in the modelling, but also the observing side of things. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emma, and again, congratulations to the whole GUS community for really, providing and proposing transformative approach to ocean observation through the decade. This is very exciting, and as you said, there's a really strong focus and interest there. We have several programs that are going to kick off and again help us to achieve this decade challenge. Now going from a global observation, ocean observation theme to the regions, it's also very important that IOC regional subsidiary bodies play a leading role in helping to support collaboration and co-design for regional decade actions, helping to carry out assessments of what are the capacity development needs that needs to be supported, gap analysis, and also tracking some of those actions. So to hear from what's happening in Africa, we've invited our colleague Mika Odido, who's the head of the IOC Africa Subcommission Secretariat, to give us a bit of an overview of what is happening there in terms of the decade and what are the next steps. So Mika, over to you.
Thank you very much, Julian, for giving us the opportunity to share what's happening in the regions. Right from the planning stage, IOC has been very alive to the need to involve regional stakeholders in not just implementation of decade activities, but also in planning. Through a series of regional planning workshops and virtual co-design workshops, IOC has worked with the regional stakeholders to both identify what are the key priorities and to work on developing a co-design initiative to address these priorities. In the 3 regional sub-commissions, IOC Africa, IO Caribbean, and Westpac, we've also worked with the partners in these regional regions in developing the programs. 4 enabling activities can be identified in the interventions of IOC. First of all is facilitation of co-design and co-delivery of decade actions. Secondly, facilitating the exchange amongst and between communities of practice in the regions. Thirdly, supporting coordination of and building capacity for resource mobilization efforts. And lastly, developing regional communication and outreach activities. Next slide, please. I'll now focus on what we've done so far in Africa and the adjacent island states. We had a series of regional consultation workshops in 2020 and 2029. The major one was here in Nairobi at the beginning of last year for the Africa and the adjacent island states, but we also benefited from participating in the one for South Atlantic for West African countries, for Indian Ocean for the East African countries, and for Mediterranean for the North African countries. Out of these workshops, we had several recommendations that we can categorize into 3. The first one focused on harnessing the demographic dividend. Africa is a very young continent with most of the population below 35. I think 70% of the population is below 35. So one of the issues that came up very strongly during the consultation was how do we ensure that this youthful population is engaged in ocean sciences and contribute to the decade. The second issue that came up was on research, catalyzing research and linking research results to societal applications, improving the quality of the research, and ensuring that the research contributes to the science policy interface. And then thirdly was establishing university-based ocean incubator hub supported by the private sector. One emphasis that came out throughout the consultation was the need to focus on regional priorities. And the constituency that we are working with already feel that the regional bodies, such as the African Union, have already identified several key priorities areas that we should contribute by providing the science base necessary for harnessing the blue economy. In addition to the regional consultation workshop, we also had a regional co-design workshop online in November last year, and we are planning a regional kickoff workshop in Egypt in December this year. In preparation for this major event in Egypt, we've got support from Norway and Sweden to support a regional gap analysis, which will inform the development of projects in the region. We will also be establishing a regional task force to coordinate the regional gap analysis. On the basis of the gap analysis, we'll work on identification of projects from the ideas generated And hopefully we'll be getting support to develop this into full-scale projects. We are also looking at developing communication tools in preparation for the kickoff workshop, and also regional focused communication tools for the decade in general. So these are some of the areas that we've worked on over the last year as we prepare for launch of the decade in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mika, and very, very important work that you're doing and really creating the enabling conditions for those stakeholders in Africa to work together and deliver decade actions. Also very pleased to the support provided by Norway and Sweden, and also inviting other potential donors to help in the regions in particular. And I also want to highlight that, you know, in the IO-Caribbean region and the West Pac region, in the IO-Cindio region, there are also similar processes ongoing where we are really trying to develop that capacity there. With this, thank you. We are going to go now to the more national perspective and in particular focus for our next presentation about the role of national decade committees in supporting and particularly contributing to the coordination of national level stakeholders as they come together to co-design and work together in the context of a decade. So I'm going to invite now my colleague Julie Rigaud with the decade team to provide a brief overview of the results of an online survey we conducted a couple of months ago, as well as the development of specific guidelines on the establishment of those national coordination mechanisms. Julie, over to you.
Thank you, Julian. The Decade Implementation Plan offers a coordination framework to coordinate and to promote the decade globally and in all regions. And as part of this framework, the creation of national decade committees, which are voluntary and multi-stakeholder platforms, will be encouraged to engage national stakeholders and facilitate national contributions, as well as to promote awareness and interest. The IOC Secretariat is coordinating a structural engagement with national decade committees and developed an online survey to collect information from member states on their progress in establishing national decade committees or the plan to do so in the future. 52 member states participated and 29 member states have expressed their interest in establishing such a committee, and 24 have already established or are in the process of establishing a national decade committee. And you can see on screen the list of these committees and the fair geographical balance. Most of these national decade committees have been established on the basis of an existing committee, and they are a relatively small group of stakeholders, around 20 members in general. National decade committees will determine their own procedures for identifying members. They are encouraged to promote inclusive and balanced representation across genders, generations, ethnic groups, and geographical areas. The existing national decade committees have a fair sectoral diversity with a lot of experts from universities or research institutes and representatives of governments, a good participation of NGO and private sector, but few experts from the private foundations and multilateral funding agencies. And also few representatives of the community groups. Only 17% of this National Decade Committee ensure the participation of indigenous and local communities. And gender balance need to be promoted. So far, the gender balance is not really ensured, with only 33% of female members of these newly established committees. And also the ECOPS participation needs to be encouraged. We have only 48% of these established national decade committees that include ECOPS members. So please do not hesitate to contact us. We can help identify ECOPS through the global network of ECOPS. Most of these national decade committees adopted or will adopt terms of reference and have created a dedicated website. And one of the questions of the survey was what kind of information would be useful for the national decade committees. And the participants stressed the need for providing information on the establishment of these committees, some example, best practices, information about the calls for action, the opportunities, and not only for their country, and the need also to provide relevant information to broad audience through a newsletter or webinars. And the National Decade Committee's focal points would be also interested in participating in regular meetings and platforms on a quarterly basis. We are pleased to inform you that the deadline for this survey has been extended until September this year to enable newly established National Decade Committees to provide information about their activities via this survey online. The result of the survey enabled IOC Secretariat to inform the development of operational guidelines on the establishment and activities of these National Decade Committees. And these guidelines build on information contained within the implementation plan. These provide soft guidance that will, and these guidelines, will be presented as an information document at the IOC Assembly next week and posted on the Ocean Decade website. And you can see on the screen the link to access this document. The creation of National Decade Committee is encouraged to facilitate national contributions. So we would like to kindly remind you that the request for registration should be sent via the Ocean Decade email address, oceandecade@unesco.org. And this request should be sent by the national IOC focal point. And finally, and that's the end of this presentation, National Decade Committees established in countries with strong government support and access to resources are also encouraged to mentor committees operating in countries with limited capacity and resources. And you can find here on the screen the list of focal points of these National Decade Committees on the Ocean Decade website. They will also have the opportunity to share some experience on the Global Stakeholder Forum online platform that will be operational later this year in November and will facilitate this cooperation. So thank you very much for your attention, and you can submit your written question in the Q&A box. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you very much, Julie, and also very important, the decade really depends on a strong national leadership. So we're very encouraged to see those National Decade Committees to emerge. But of course, it would be great that we had as many as IOC member states, and if not more, why not? Okay, so very good. So we are now going to go back maybe to some of the regional dimension that we started to talk about through the IOC Africa work here, but I just want to remind you that in the preparation phase of the decade, you might remember that we organized several regional planning workshops across all ocean basins over a 2-year period. And many of these workshops have continued to work actually and form a regional stakeholder platforms to really identify specific priorities, identify capacity development priorities, and really use this mechanism to propose innovative and transformative decade actions. We are going to hear today from one of those regional processes, and this is the Arctic region, where we have a group of member states and leading institutions that have worked over a year and a half, 2 years even, to frame what they would like to do in the context of a decade. And this has resulted in the development of a regional Arctic Ocean Decade action plan. So to present this, I will now invite my colleague Henrik Evolsen, who's the leader of the IOC Hub program in Copenhagen, but who also has been supported very actively this process. So Henrik, over to you for this brief intervention.
Thank you, Julian. So, as Julian just introduced, this is an example of how it can be approached at the regional level. And the process for the Arctic region was organized around trying to answer 2 key questions. And the first was, what are the barriers that hinder progress towards achieving the societal outcomes of the decade in the Arctic region? And what transformative ocean science solutions will help to overcome these barriers, and how could they be implemented through the Ocean Decade? So that was the setting for the process in the Arctic with the goal of developing an action plan. Next slide, please. This is just an overview of the process, of the timeline, really kicked off in January 2020 as a session at the Arctic Frontiers meeting in Tromsø in Norway, where the first boundaries for the process and for the focus of an Arctic action plans were set. Then the idea was to have had a physical workshop shortly after in Copenhagen. That, of course, because of COVID, didn't work out. And then you see what we had instead was a completely virtual process with a task force launching it, going through the analysis, synthesizing, so has required quite a few online meetings, but has also worked and has actually allowed probably a broader involvement in the region that we might have had if it had been a physical workshop. So we are at the end of this timeline, and the action plan has just been released, just been published. Next slide, please. The process is no surprise. It's similar to what can be expected both at national level and at regional level, standing on the action framework for the decade with the challenges, the expected outcomes. There was established a working group within the task force that would work with each of the societal outcomes. And each of those working groups identified the particular challenges in the Arctic and the necessary actions to be taken, and synthesized this into a draft action plan by end of last year. And then through the first part of this year, there has been online consultations with different stakeholders. There has been adjustments, adaptations, and in particular, I would say very important part of the process was to ensure that there was sufficient input from the non-scientific community, from indigenous groups, from other end users of knowledge and data and users of the marine environment in the Arctic. And then that led to the action plan as it has been now published. So the process needs to be highly engaging and involving. Yes, next slide, please. The summary of the action plan, the input from the 7 working groups are that they identified 5 cross-cutting barriers. There is a disconnected Arctic in terms of communications, although it's a huge area, not that many people, but very divided communities and entities are dealing with and addressing different things. There is an insufficient means to ensure safety and health in terms of understanding and ability to respond to hazards, pollution, etc. There is also inadequate knowledge of the value and distribution of resources. So that refers to mapping, valuation, and science policy support. And there is in many areas inadequate management in terms of adaptive integrated approaches, goes both for environmental observations and detection, documentation of trends, of changes. And then there is an adequate support to the region or in the region in terms of both financial, human, and institutional capacity. That based on those identified barriers, the action plan has been arranged on some thematic areas. So it identifies the research challenges, the core areas which should be advanced to enable transformative ocean science solutions, the organizational challenges which relate to providing and supporting efficient coordination, infrastructure management, and the funding, of course, and also the public support to activities in the region. And then also options for enhancing and accelerating the social societal uptake and benefits in the region. That has been identified as a really key stone of transforming management of the marine environment in the Arctic. Next slide, please. So just in brief, the structure of the plan is really addressing different audiences and has been written in that way. There is an introduction describing the process and everything, which is basically for anyone interested. There is a section on identifying the key cross-cutting barriers to overcome, which is really for all key actors in the decade. And then the action plan itself has specific sections that addresses itself to specifically the scientific community by identifying specific scientific research challenges, to environmental agencies, specific challenges in terms of management, specific challenges in terms of funding for research and innovation, specific challenges for governance, for governments, to the private sector and to the public. So the attempt here has been to have a document where elements and sections can be taken out and used to address more targeted different groups of society that are necessary to achieve this. So what have we learned in this process? A lot of interest and enthusiasm from hundreds of participating stakeholders, high quality input, and it's quite useful, important to have a task force advisory group with high diversity, so sectors, nationality, and all diversity in all terms. Getting high-level support for this type of effort is not easy. We're talking about someone to take strong ownership early on, support the process, say, yes, we want this, is challenging, and before there is an actual plan. So that process is ongoing and also a challenge even after. And some stakeholders do not easily see any benefit from being involved. So there is a huge communication effort needed and challenge ahead. Next slide, please, if I have any. So if you want to dive deeper in this example of one way to do a regional action plan, you will find the full report and document here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henrik, for this this great work that the Arctic institutions and countries are doing there. Let me also tell you that this process is also happening in other parts of the world, in particular in the Western tropical Atlantic region, where there is a very active task group there, in the Mediterranean, and also in the South Pacific region. And this is a short video message that we're now going to show you before we go into Q&As, if there are. And by the way, let me just remind you that you can still pose a question if you feel like it. So the South Pacific also is an important region for the decade, and certainly we've been working very closely with the South Pacific community there in engaging stakeholders. So we are going to hear from them on what's their plan for the decade. Let's show the video.
The Pacific Ocean is made of large ocean states, not just small islands. And some of our countries manage and are custodian of parts of our ocean that are as big as continental land masses. And the Pacific Ocean is also intrinsic to the people of its region. It's a food source and it's the cultural core for Pacific populations. Indigenous Pacific Islanders have sailed this ocean for thousands of years. Ensuring the ocean continues to survive for and with the Pacific people is core to SPC's integrated ocean management program. And through this program, we look forward to contributing to the global urgency towards saving our oceans, and this during the UN Decade of Ocean Science. This program has been named Pacific Solutions for a Healthy Blue Pacific Continent, Integrated Ocean Management to sustain livelihoods today and into the future. Livelihoods, Pacific people from our entire Blue Pacific region is central to this work. The development of this program has been done through years of consultation and support from all sectors. In 2019, we brought together more than 200 people from the ocean sector, including media partners, scientists, traditional and indigenous practitioners, youth representatives, cultural experts, and broad representatives from agencies across the Pacific to consult and determine the needs and approaches that are required to achieve an effective and holistic development of this integrated ocean management program. To collectively achieve the outcomes and the goals of the program, the following project areas are proposed. First, develop robust legal and governance frameworks to implement national ocean policies. Building on already existing work at national level while supporting regional approaches to support this work. We also want to improve the decision support system so that national policies are supported by evidence-based science and that are led and relevant to the Pacific. And last, we want to integrate traditional knowledge, culture, and wisdom to support inclusive and consultative decision-making. The Pacific Community Center for Ocean Science, or PICOS, at SPC will tackle the delivery of this work with the help of future generations of ocean professionals, through Pacific Early Career Ocean Professional Network. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And as you have heard, this this particular program on ocean management in the South Pacific was part of the endorsement announcements that were made yesterday. Okay, dear colleagues, we have very little time left. We have 3 minutes left. I don't really see any burning live question in the Q&A, but I just maybe want to dwell on one of the questions that was, I think, entered online, because I think it really deserves a bit more visibility. And that's a question from Kevin Webb. It says, I'm intrigued, how can you fund these programs? Is there a possibility for an individual to make a donation to a specific programs? So maybe I'd like to ask Alison just to say a few words about how we see this kind of interface between potential contributors, whether those are governments, philanthropists, private sector, and the programs we have announced, and how can we really try to matchmake and support those programs through those contributions? Alison, do you have any? I'm sure you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I always have thoughts. Thank you, Julian. Yeah, so it's a really important question, because I think there's a lot of expectation or a lot of questioning in the community about how can the Ocean Decade help me find new resources for my work. And it's obviously something that we want people to feel that the decade does have an added value to helping them connect with new resources. But in saying that, we need to be very clear that the Ocean Decade itself is not a funding mechanism. It's not a pool of financing that's sitting there. When we endorse programs, we certainly don't have, unfortunately, financial allocations that we can make to those programs. But the IOC really sees itself and is positioned itself within the implementation plan as part of its coordinating agency role, almost as a matchmaker. That's sort of the informal terminology we were using, where we're working very closely with philanthropic foundations, with private sector, increasingly with other financial institutions, to really educate them, raise awareness, work with them so that they know that there's this wealth of fantastic programs and projects out there that are coming through the decade. And then the IOC is essentially trying to play the role of matchmaker between those resource providers who are convinced that the decade is a worthy cause, a worthy initiative to support, and those programs that need funding and support. So it's really going to be an ongoing process. We will be developing resource needs assessments that will really identify the priority needs, and then working again to present those to funders and make those connections. We have a couple of mechanisms, including the Ocean Decade Alliance, which is a group of very eminent partners, including several heads of state, as well as heads of philanthropic foundations, who have committed to being part of this resource mobilization effort for the Ocean Decade. So it's certainly a priority for us this year. There will be a first information document presented to the Assembly next week, which will outline some of these principles and approaches in more detail. And for the following months, it's really an area where we're going to be putting a lot of focus to have some very concrete next steps in the resource mobilization approach, so that we can fully play this matchmaker or connector role between the programs and those that have the resources that they can provide.
Great, thank you very much. And I think we are about over time now. I see there's a question from Abdullah Suleiman in Malaysia regarding Westpac, and I think you've already answered in the Q&A chat kind of response to that in terms of programs from the Westpac region. We don't have, as part of this first announcement, specifically Westpac-led initiatives, but certainly we know that, and our colleague Ken Endo reminds us that there are some great ideas coming out of the region, and we certainly hope to see them in the next call for action. And we'll also work with our colleagues in the Westpac Secretariat to support the development of those actions. With this, colleagues, it's 3 o'clock here in Paris. I want to thank our audience for following this webinar. Let me remind you that the IOC Assembly will also dedicate a whole plenary session on the 17th of June, dedicated to the decade, and in particular, we will also discuss the establishment of a decade advisory board and other governance elements of a decade. So important time for the decade. But again, I want to thank all of you for your contributions, to our panelists, to the technical teams in Mexico who again have delivered a seamless webinar. And again, stay tuned, and we look forward to working with you in the coming months and years on achieving the ocean we want and the ocean we need. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Good evening to all of you.